Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 4. We are kind of in a little bit of a two-part little leg of our 6 series podcasts, and it's on receptive communication. So we talked last episode on expressive communication and how we express ourselves and what are the things that we need to think about in a neurodiverse relationship, but also just generally in communication. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, we encourage you to start there and then come back or listen to this, and you can kind of go back to that. There's really no order because receptive and expressive communication go both ways. So just wanted to just kind of do a quick high-level recap of the difference between those types of communication. So we have expressive communication. That's how we say things, what we say, and that can be verbal, nonverbal, facial expressions, body language, all of that. And then receptive communication is what we receive, what we hear as a listener when someone is speaking to us. So receiving that, hence the word receptive. And so we're going to talk about that in more depth today and really dive into some things that we think can be really helpful as we talk about the intersection of kind of sexual integrity issues and the repairs that come with that, as well as the specifics around being in a neurodiverse relationship where autism is present for us. So awesome. We're glad you're here with us and hope you've enjoyed the episodes. We're a little bit more than halfway through this series. So
awesome.
Okay,
well, maybe we'll start out. I think as I think about receptive communication, one of the things for me that kind of comes up is I think everybody wants to be heard. Right. Mm-hmm. And when we have in a relationship, when we have communication that's going on, there may be just kind of this struggle to feel heard or a desire to be heard or in that. Do you want to share a little bit? I know that's been part of our journey of you feeling like you're being heard or you've been heard and that you have a voice.
Yeah.
And how that plays.
Yeah, for sure. I think learning, what I need in relationship and expressing that has been really important, and being known and being heard at a depth has been something ingrained in me. God gave that to me. I've wrestled with it. I talk about that wrestle of the deep pursuit of being known and being understood and being heard. And that's also been a huge struggle for us in, just you receiving what I'm trying to share and even my desires and my longings in relationship, especially I would say with regard to the, kind of emotional neglect moments and things that I would express something and you wouldn't receive it very well. So and I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means at receiving information, because receiving information is hard. And we'll talk about some different ways that we can receive information and how we receive it through filters. But I know that's been hard for me because I've just really wanted to be known. I think we all really want to be known. And there's just an extra level of struggle in a neurodiverse relationship because we don't understand the other person's knownness, if you will. You could be around other guys in recovery or in autism, like support groups and stuff and feel really known. And I can be in partner betrayal groups and I can be in, partners of autistics groups and feel really known, but we get in this bind together where we don't feel super known. And so anyways, as I express that, what comes up for you often with regard to receiving what I'm asking and, what I'm trying to express, especially at not just a household chore level, but at a deeper, emotional level? What would you say?
For sure. I think that the first thing that I see as a challenge for me with my neurodiversity is being able to recognize that communication is happening right now. Like we're having dialogue. And in order for me to receive, I actually have to be very intentional to slow my brain down, to be intentional to not just hear the words, but to listen to what you're saying. And so there's a big difference for me in that. If my brain is firing off, if I'm in the middle of a task, if I'm in the middle of doing something, I'm probably not receiving what you're saying. And I have to be very intentional with that. I'll even add to that Shauna may come to me and say, hey, do you have a minute for me to share something? Right? She's asking me, are your relational circuits on? Are you ready to receive what I'm going to say?
It's important.
And oftentimes my brain just instinctively says, yeah, what's up? The reality is I wasn't ready. So now Shauna is trusting what I've said. And some of this is back to our relational safety plan we talked about previously and in prior episodes. Shauna is now trusting. So she now expresses, and I do not receive it. I let it fall flat on the floor. And I now have created another rupture, another problem that we have to address in that. Versus now I've been able to, at times, Shauna will say, hey, do you have a second for me to share something? I'll pause. Yes, go ahead. Or I might even say, you know what? Just give me a second to tie a bow on this. And then I will come and say, okay, now I'm in a place. For me as a neurodiverse individual to receive, it is an intentional, conscious effort. It doesn't just happen for my brain.
Yeah, it's not as intuitive as it is for me. If someone says, now I could be in the middle of something too. That's not not always perfect by any means on my end. But I think it's much more intuitive for me than it is for you to be, oh, okay, I can stop what I'm doing. Oh, what was that? And be right back to my task. It's not the train on the track that won't stop. It's the minivan with all the doors opening and the kids jumping in and out. And, it's really that analogy. I'd heard that a while ago and loved it. But the reality is, I like when you said, like, I just drop it or let it fall flat, because I would say, like, I'm communicating, I'm giving you the ball, I'm communicating something, expressing something. Now you have to pick that up to receive it. And you would just leave the ball in the middle of the room. And I would be left feeling so lonely and, just misunderstood and confused. And why can't you receive what I'm asking?
Yeah, so. And I think that really becomes, that intentionality becomes so important, not just in the neurodiversity side, but when there is that prior, betrayal and damage and harm in the relationship.
Yeah, because I'm trying to say, am I important? At the end of the day, if you've acted out, which we do talk about even more in episode 2, as, this whole, intersection of the sexual integrity issues. But what I think is important there is just recognizing you slowing down and letting me know that you are there. Because I think when I ask that, I'm actually asking your permission to turn your brain on in that relational way that says I am more important than the task. So I think that's the reality of, just making sure that, that I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah. In addition to that, I think that one of the other challenges I have in receiving feedback is just a very high hypersensitivity to what I'm receiving in. And what I mean by a hypersensitivity is one of the characteristics that is prominent for me in my autism is really this hypersensitivity to perceived criticism. I receive, well, I won't use the every, but I receive many comments from you in a very sensitive and in a very I take them very critically. And that's not what you intend for it. But as one of the character traits that I struggle with is that hypersensitivity to perceived criticism. And when that is a part of my receptive lens and filter, it usually never goes well for us. It is usually met with defensiveness, maybe dismissing, blaming, maybe even blaming back,
for sure.
In that. So you want to share a few things around the impact of that for you?
Yeah, that's really hard for me. That's really, really hard to just know my intention and my motive, especially if I feel like I've gotten your permission, especially if I feel like you have said I could give some feedback on this, or I could share my perspective, right? That's another thing on receptive communication I want to talk about is perspective, because when we don't take that perspective of another person, that theirs might be different from mine, that makes it really hard. So I think when I get your permission to speak about something or to give my input on something, there's different types of feedback that I think are really sensitive for you. And I think the talking about the different types of, what we've learned. There's a book that talks about feedback and some specifics around that, but the different type, like we actually use the language because we've been in recovery rooms and meetings and I'm open to your feedback. Well, wait, what feedback are we open to? Are we open to all the feedback? And, some of the feedback is affirmative, like, great job. I really like how you handled that.
I'll take that every day.
He's like, sure, I'll take that. Who doesn't want that feedback? Now, sometimes actually that is really sensitive, or we don't want that yet, depending on where we are in our story, or if there's been ruptures that are, deceptive in nature and intimate in nature. Sometimes even that affirmative feedback is hard to receive too. But most of the time, most of us as human beings will take affirmative feedback. The other type being coaching feedback. So recognizing like, I'm going to give you some feedback. Maybe you could do this a little differently. And that, I get sensitive to that too, depending on, how it's being said. If I feel like it's judgy or, you should do it this way. And the language isn't, hey, I have an idea for you. You kind of said a lot of stuff like that. I talk in the book about, I couldn't pull a damn weed right. And, certain things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, stop coaching me on everything. I didn't ask for your feedback. But aside from that, in the moments where I would give feedback on coaching, maybe you could try this or look at this, or maybe you could communicate it differently. That was really hard because it's like you would go so young in like a childhood wound and like think I wasn't for you. And that was so hard. That was probably one of the hardest ones. And then the last one that, is talked about is really like, giving the assessment or evaluation, evaluative. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But really saying like, I think it could have looked like this, or this is my perspective on something, and I'm actually going to assess that. And that we have to be really careful with when someone's doing something in their own way. But even the mild coaching or giving you feedback like that, if it wasn't like, attaboy, good job.
Yep.
And for so long, I was like, I am not going to give you that kind of feedback when we are still building safety. But there are other times that it would be really sensitive. And I'm like, he doesn't think I'm for him. And that really was true for you. You really didn't think I was for you in a lot of times.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that one of the challenges and struggles for me is with a lot of my black and white thinking. There is positive affirmative, or there is negative everything else.
Interesting.
And so, even as you were just sharing coaching, which I would say is the gray in the middle, right? Still ended up in a bucket one way or the other. And because coaching has some things that you could improve on or that you could grow with, therefore, i.e. it's negative. And so it is which is now bad. And so it was this very black and white, either, good or bad feedback. And that's how I received it. It wasn't, how you were expressing it. It was in my
Most of the
receiving
time.
of
I mean,
that.
sometimes I probably was saying it rudely or whatever,
but that goes back to, just kind of that hypersensitivity to perceived criticism that I struggle with. That if there's any hint of, negative in what you're saying, that hypersensitivity will throw it all out. And then again, it goes back to what I was sharing earlier of the defensiveness, the blaming, the critical response, and all of that starts to fire back at that.
Yeah. And do you think, on that real quick, do you think that hit on, as you received it, that hit on like a shame belief that like, I'm saying it bad, hence I am bad? Do you think it hit on that a lot, or is I can't do anything right? And so I'm pushing back on, you think I can't do anything right, or I can't say this right, or what do you think for you?
I think it was maybe some of all of that at different times. I think depending upon the situation, depending upon what the topic was, depending upon really where I was in that moment, right? Was I balanced and stable? Was I feeling confident in myself that day or in that moment or in that conversation? Where was I to receive that, right? So much is where am I? What place am I in for that?
So knowing yourself. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry to
interrupt. Which I think is such a huge part of that is, what do I need to be doing for myself to put myself in a place to receive and to be open to receiving that? And that, again, for me, is very intentional, direct work.
Yeah, two things just came up. But I think that intentional, direct work of checking in with yourself and making sure you know where you are. I think you used the word confident. So knowing that I'm confident to receive this. The other thing that just happened is I went to interrupt you. And in receptive communication, that can be a huge trigger for you in your train of thought. So again, that train analogy of like train is going, and I was like, oh, wait, that could really disrupt his thought and he might not come back to it. Where I got that minivan door open and I'm gonna reopen it again, and then someone's gonna get out the other side, and that's how my brain works. But I just recognize that, and I think it's important we talk about interrupting, because that is a really sensitive thing for you.
It is, and I think it's a sensitive thing for a lot of neurodiverse guys that I talk to and I mentor and work with, and I think I would kind of say this is if you remember earlier, I was saying that in one conversation I've got 1,000 thoughts, and in more I've got 4,000. So I now have been able to land on that track, on that thought, and I'm now going to be sharing with you that thought. That doesn't mean that all of those other flying around thoughts have stopped. And so when I get interrupted on one, all of a sudden that track just was a dead end. And now all those other thoughts that were swirling are back in the picture again. And so trying to find where that thought was and get back on it can be very difficult.
Does that feel really stressful to because I know when I get interrupted, I'm like, yeah, okay, well, where'd that thought go? Like, oh, shoot, I lost my train of thought, right? It's really interesting that we're using the train analogy, and I just put that together. I lost my train of thought. So looking at that, is it really frustrating for you to have that and then be like, ugh, like all those thoughts now are whirling versus, oh, I'm calm about this. It's okay. Like, no big deal. Does it cause a lot of frustration?
It does cause a lot of frustration, and it causes a lot of inadequacy as well, because to get to that point takes so much work.
To what point?
To the point of being able to express it. Like, I've had to receive, I've had to process, I've had to hopefully filter, and now I've had to begin to communicate, which, if I'm very intentional about how I'm communicating, as from our last episode around expressive, there's a lot that goes into ensuring I'm expressing in a healthy, safe, manner. So there's a lot that goes into saying something. And so when there's an interruption, and not good receptive listening, it is a trigger. I don't want to use that word. It's not a trigger. It just gets me frustrated because of the work that it took to get there. And I can't just go back and grab it again.
Okay, so it's activating something. It's intensely
I like that.
unpleasant.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, it's intensely unpleasant as you think about like your mood meter that you use and for checking with your feelings. Yeah. Okay. Yep. What are some of the other like common maybe feelings or experiences that you hear from maybe other guys, maybe yourself in trying, when they don't feel adequate? I like that word. They feel inadequate to receive and then hence be expected to express again.
Right.
What other feelings or things? We've talked a little bit about inadequacy, around the frustration, maybe a tad around the shame. Do you think there's more around the shame, like I should be able to do that, or sometimes not
no,
always?
because I don't know that we even connect with that necessarily sometimes.
Oh, really? Okay.
That we should in that. I think that there can become a frustration as well as we're trying to receive and understand the context. So one of the things that when we talk about receiving, that can be a struggle for me is I'm going to receive it. Now I need to understand it. And so there becomes a real challenge for me in trying to understand what you just said. And sometimes I will be focusing so hard on the understanding that my receptors to receive any more communication are completely off. So and this goes back to our last episode when you were talking about expressive communication, keep it simple. Just keep them short, keep them single topic. If you try and share multiple topics with me in one expressive communication, I am not receiving all of that.
Got it.
I received the first one, maybe a little bit of the second one, but by the time you got to the third, I'm still back trying to understand what you meant and what you were saying with the first item. So
you get confused too in that, right? That sometimes shows up as frustration.
Absolutely.
You get you'll say, I'm really confused by that. And I'm like, okay, well, it's 1, 2, and 3. These are the 3 things I wanted to say. And you'll get confused which one I'm talking about and when, and then it's going really, really fast.
Because again, I think for often folks that are better at communication, it's a conglomerate. It's all 3 of those in one.
Yeah.
And
kind of pinging around.
For someone like myself that's more linear, can we talk about the first topic and then let's close that and then can we go to the next topic? It's kind of like opening the lids of boxes, right? Let's not open all the lids at once. Can we open this box, address it, and then move to the next box?
Yeah.
And so there's a part of receiving that then is the processing and the understanding of that. And if I am feeling flooded by too much of that coming in, my receiving receptors are in essence shut off. I'm not in. You could talk for an hour and I'm not hearing anything more after that because I'm still back at the first part.
Okay. I think what I hear in couples work too is the frustration around that for the person that can ping around. I'll say ping around, right? And it comes more intuitively. It's easier. It's like, why is this so hard? I don't understand. It can be really frustrating. So how I receive that back is important, that I'm not hearing it, that he doesn't want to do that with me. He doesn't want to talk about all 3, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like as slow as molasses, or whatever the saying is. But right, it's like snail pace. And sometimes in couples work, I see that it goes a little bit slower because the receptors, we've got to grow them. It's not that they can't grow, but we've got to like let that expand and let that neuroplasticity, stretch a little bit in how much can you take in. And so I think how I receive that is important, that I don't take that personally too. that it's not you don't want to know. And I think it's really important when you express to say, I want to know about all 3 points. You want to share all 3 things from your day. I just have one, right? And you're like, I just have one. Why don't you just have one? And I'm like, but I have 3 things that are really, really important to me. And so you saying to me has been helpful. I really do want to hear about all 3. Can we just do one right now? And then can I go, lay down for a bit, or can I go put on my, bilateral music for a bit? Can I go do something in the yard? Can I go get a glass of water? It still can feel a little frustrating for me because I want to move on. I don't want to take that much time because I don't need that much time. So it takes empathy. We're going to talk about empathy next. But it takes empathy and grace for me, and just like taking a breath and recognizing that. So,
yeah, and I would add to that it takes intentionality and commitment on the part of the neurodiverse individual to stay in that. It is much easier to avoid the conversation, to leave it, to just drop it. That's much easier than doing the work to engage in the conversation. And our hope is that if you're here listening to this podcast and or joining us in the workshops, is that you're looking to grow that. You're not wanting to just leave that where it sits, and that's that takes intentionality and it takes work, and often it's it's just a continuation of the work that we've already started through recovery to build trust and relational safety. Communication is a part of that work just the same way.
That's really important. I know we're getting close to the time to close today, but I think that part of what you're saying and the intentionality has gone so far for me, because then I know it matters to you, and then hence I believe I matter to you in that. And so, yeah, that's really, really important. And if we tend to be more avoidant, there's times where, as we talk about determined for more, the book title, the title of this podcast series, there's been times where I've been more like trying to resolve and you've been more avoidant. And then other times where I just kind of want to throw my hands up and just say, forget it. This is too much work. Like, I don't want to do this. And you're like, no, I'm not settling. We are going to increase and better our communication so we can have a better relationship. And there are times when you've been determined for more, and I'm like, I'm done. Like, this is so exhausting for me. So I'm just encouraged just to be able to even be here. Guys, this is a miracle that we're here in a lot of ways. And I don't say that lightly. If you know our story, you know that. But I think it's really important that you know that your story can be determined. Like, you can stay determined for more in your story too, and how important that is. And just how much God honors that is so, so cool to see this and to see the fruit from that. And so we're here and just so glad you're joining us. And yeah, do you want to close us today?
Yeah, no, okay. That's amazing. Awesome. And as Shauna mentioned, there is the book out that Shauna wrote, Determined for More. That is available through our website, which is www.livingstonescoaching.com. You can find links right there on the website to purchase the book through Amazon. It's also available in Kindle and audiobook as well. And then these workshops that we are doing, walking through this 6-episode series of growing and determined for more in our relationship. These workshops are available to you through the website as well. You're able to join us along this journey and just continue your growth towards healing and recovery as well. So we're excited to have you with us. Thank you so much for your support, and we will look forward to catching up with you next time. Take care.
We're glad you're here. See you next time.